The keys felt cold in my palm as I stared at what should have been my dream house. 2 years of saving every penny from my law practice. 2 years of planning our perfect life together after Michael's father passed. The white colonial stood exactly as I'd imagined during those late-night Zillow searches. Wraparound porch, bay windows, the kind of place where you raise kids and grow old together. But when I turned that key and pushed open the front door, the sound that greeted me wasn't silence or the echo of our footsteps in an empty home. It was the rustle of cardboard boxes and hushed voices drifting from the living room. "Honey, why are there—" I started, but Michael was already walking ahead of me, his shoulders tense in that way they got when he was avoiding something. Have you ever bought a house to make someone else happy? Because standing in that doorway, I realized I'd just purchased the most expensive mistake of my life. My mother-in-law, Linda, emerged from what should have been our kitchen, carrying a box marked Linda's China in her careful cursive. Behind her, my sister-in-law, Janet, dragged a suitcase down the hallway like she owned the place. They looked at me with the kind of casual acknowledgement you'd give a delivery driver, necessary but temporary. "Oh, Patricia," Linda said, not quite meeting my eyes. "We didn't expect you so early." The "we" hit me like a slap. Michael hadn't mentioned any "we" when we'd driven the 6 hours from Chicago to his hometown. He talked about fresh starts and being closer to family after his father's funeral, but he'd never mentioned his family would be unpacking their entire lives into the house I'd bought. I know you've felt it too. That moment when you realize you're the outsider in your own story. The way they moved around each other with practiced efficiency. The way Janet had already claimed the master bedroom upstairs, judging by the clothes scattered on my bed, visible through the open door. "Where exactly are you planning to—" I began. But Linda cut me off with a look that could freeze July. "We're gonna have a celebration party tomorrow," she announced, her voice carrying that false sweetness Southern women use right before they destroy you. "You know, to honor Frank's memory, so you need to leave tonight. You're in the way." The words hung in the air like smoke. I looked at Michael, waiting for him to correct his mother, to remind her whose name was on the deed, whose money had made this moment possible. But he was studying his shoes like they held the secrets of the universe. That's when I understood the real meaning of family first. It meant everyone in the family mattered except me. And that's exactly when the wealthy woman appeared at our front door and asked the question that would change everything. Mrs. Anderson looked like money, the kind that whispers instead of shouts. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her clothes understated but clearly expensive. She stood in our doorway, my doorway, with the confidence of someone who'd never been told she was in the way. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying a slight tremor. "I'm looking for my daughter. Where is my daughter?" The effect was immediate. Linda dropped her box, the china inside rattling like broken promises. Janet appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale. Michael finally looked up from his shoes, and I saw something I'd never seen before, fear. But Mrs. Anderson was looking directly at me, her blue eyes wide with something between hope and horror. "You look just like her when she was your age," she whispered. "Do you want to warn me about what's coming next? Because I wish someone had." The silence stretched until Linda found her voice. "Mrs. Anderson, what are you doing here? We told you last time." "Last time?" I interrupted. "You've met before?" The pieces were shifting, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. Mrs. Anderson stepped closer to me, studying my face like she was memorizing it. "This was my daughter's house. She died here 10 years ago." Her voice broke on the last word. "And every year, I come back to ask the same question that nobody will answer." I felt the ground shift beneath me. The house I'd researched so carefully, the property records I'd reviewed as a real estate attorney, had somehow missed this crucial detail. A woman had died here, Mrs. Anderson's daughter. "What do you think Patricia should do now?" I wanted to ask you, but you weren't there. None of you were. It was just me, standing between a grieving mother and a family with secrets written all over their faces. Michael stepped forward, placing himself between Mrs. Anderson and me. "Ma'am, you need to leave. This is private property." "Private property?" Mrs. Anderson's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "My daughter saved every penny to buy this house. She was going to propose to her boyfriend here, start a family. Instead, she ended up at the bottom of the basement stairs with a broken neck." "The basement?" "I'd toured this house 3 times and never once gone into the basement." "Structural issues," the previous owner had said. "Best to leave it alone." Janet was backing away up the stairs, her suitcase forgotten. Linda was gripping the banisters so hard her knuckles had gone white. And Michael was looking at me like I was the problem that needed to be solved. "Her name was Sarah," Mrs. Anderson continued, pulling out her phone to show me a photo. "The woman in the picture could have been my twin. Same dark hair, same green eyes, same smile that trusted too easily. Sarah Anderson. She was 28 when she died. I was 29. I had dark hair and green eyes. I'd trusted too easily when I'd moved my entire life for a man who was now standing between me and the truth. Sometimes the victim chooses to become the hunter," I said quietly, the words coming from somewhere deep inside me. Mrs. Anderson nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. "Patricia," Michael said, his voice taking on that tone men use when they're about to explain why you're being unreasonable. "Mrs. Anderson she's been struggling since her daughter's accident. The grief—" "Accident," Mrs. Anderson's voice rose. "You call it an accident when a healthy young woman falls downstairs she'd climbed 100 times before? When the police barely investigated because someone made a phone call?" Linda was moving toward the kitchen, probably looking for an exit. Janet had disappeared entirely. But Michael held his ground, and I realized he wasn't just protecting his family from Mrs. Anderson's questions. He was protecting them from mine. "I think we should all take a step back," I said, my lawyer voice kicking in. But my mind was racing ahead, connecting dots I didn't want to see. The rushed sale when I'd bought the house. The previous owner's eagerness to close quickly. Michael's sudden enthusiasm for moving back to his hometown after years of saying he'd never return. Have you ever been married to someone who became a stranger right in front of your eyes? Mrs. Anderson reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, worn around the edges like she'd been carrying it for years. "I was FBI for 30 years before I retired," she said, pressing the card into my hand. "I know what a cover-up looks like. And honey, you're living in the middle of one." The card was warm from her touch, and I could feel the weight of 10 years of unanswered questions behind it. Michael lunged forward to grab it, but I was faster. "The truth has a way of surfacing," Mrs. Anderson said, looking directly at Michael, like bodies in water. That's when I knew my marriage was over. Not because my husband had lied to me, but because of how easily the lies had come. How practiced they sounded. "Get out," Linda's voice cut through the tension. She'd returned from the kitchen with something metallic in her hand, a wrench from the toolbox we'd brought to hang pictures. "Get out of our house right now." "Your house?" I held up the deed I'd been carrying in my purse like a talisman. Funny thing about that. Michael reached for the papers, but Mrs. Anderson stepped between us. For a woman in her 70s, she moved with surprising agility. "Careful, son," she said, and the word son dripped with venom. Laying hands on a woman in front of witnesses didn't work out so well last time. The implication hung in the air like a noose. Michael dropped his hand, but his eyes never left my face. In them, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Calculation. He was weighing his options, and I was starting to realize I might be one of them. "You know what I learned in 30 years of law enforcement?" Mrs. Anderson asked, her voice conversational again. "People who get away with murder once always think they can do it again. Have you ever wondered if the person sleeping next to you is capable of things you can't imagine? Janet reappeared at the top of the stairs, but she wasn't backing away anymore. She was listening, and there was something predatory in her stillness, something that reminded me of a cat watching a mouse. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I'm going to call my office and have them run a complete title search on this property. I'm going to request all police reports from 10 years ago, and I'm going to find out exactly what happened to Sarah Anderson." "Patricia, don't—" Michael started. "Don't what? Don't investigate a suspicious death? Don't ask questions about the house I just bought? Or don't find out why my husband was so eager to move back to the scene of a crime?" The words were out before I could stop them, and the effect was electric. Linda dropped the wrench. Michael's face went ashen. "But Janet—" Janet smiled. It was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind predators wear right before they strike. And in that moment, I realized I'd been asking the wrong questions. The question wasn't what had Michael done. The question was what was Janet about to do, Mrs. Anderson grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "We need to talk," she whispered urgently, "but not here, never here." She pressed something else into my hand, not a business card this time, but a small silver key. "Sarah's safety deposit box," she breathed. "Everything she was afraid of is in there." That's when the lights went out. In the sudden darkness, I heard the front door slam shut, the sound of multiple locks turning, and Janet's voice, no longer sweet or submissive, cutting through the black like a blade. "Nobody's leaving until we settle this family matter once and for all." I fumbled for my phone's flashlight, but Mrs. Anderson's hand stopped me. "Don't," she whispered. "Let them think we can't see." In the darkness, I heard movement, deliberate, practiced. These people had planned for this moment. They'd been waiting for someone like me to come along, someone who would ask the right questions and need to be silenced, someone like Sarah. "You know what your problem is, Patricia?" Janet's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You're exactly like her, too smart for your own good, too curious, too willing to trust the wrong people. Janet, stop." Michael's voice was strained. "This isn't what we discussed." "What you discussed?" Mrs. Anderson's whisper was sharp with betrayal. "You mean all of you knew? All of you planned this?" But I was remembering something else, something about the key Mrs. Anderson had given me. It was warm, like it had been recently used, and there was something else in my pocket, something I'd forgotten about until this moment, the panic button on my key ring. As a real estate attorney, I'd learned to be prepared for dangerous situations, home invisections, violent disputes, clients who didn't want to be found. I'd installed a GPS tracker and panic button on my keyring years ago, connected directly to a private security firm. But as I reached for it in the darkness, Janet's voice stopped me cold. "Looking for this?" The sound of metal clinking. She had my keys. "You really think we didn't notice a paranoid lawyer's little insurance policy? Do you think Patricia had a plan from the beginning, or was she about to become victim number 2? In the darkness, Mrs. Anderson's hand found mine and squeezed 3 times. A signal, FBI training perhaps, or just the desperation of a mother who'd been waiting 10 years for answers. "There's something you all don't know," I said, my voice carrying further in the darkness than I'd expected, about why I really bought this house. The movement around us stopped. Even Janet's breathing seemed to pause. "My real name isn't Patricia Miller," I continued, the lie flowing easier than truth ever had. "It's Patricia Anderson. Sarah was my sister." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. In that silence, I felt the power shift. From victim to player, from hunted to hunter. "You're lying." Michael's voice was barely a whisper. "Am I?" I asked. Ask yourself why a successful Chicago attorney would move to a small town to buy a house where someone died. Ask yourself why I never talked about my family, why I was so eager to help you reconnect with yours. Mrs. Anderson's grip on my hand tightened, but she didn't contradict me. In the darkness, she was letting me weave whatever web would keep us alive. Justice delayed, I said, my voice growing stronger, is not justice denied. And then the lights came back on, revealing Janet standing by the circuit breaker with something in her hand that definitely wasn't a wrench. But it also revealed something else. My laptop open on the kitchen counter, live streaming everything to my law firm's emergency protocol system. You see, I said, smiling at Janet's shocked expression, paranoid lawyers don't just carry panic buttons. We also carry insurance policies. Sometimes winning means everyone loses, but losing was never an option. The live stream had been running for 23 minutes when Detective Rodriguez knocked on the front door. Janet was still holding what I now realized was a syringe, her face cycling through expressions like a broken slot machine. Rage, fear, calculation, and back to rage. Police! Open up! Mrs. Anderson squeezed my hand again, but this time it felt different, triumphant. You really think we didn't have a backup plan? She whispered. Janet's eyes darted between the laptop screen showing my law firm's emergency response protocol and the front door where Detective Rodriguez was now using his shoulder to break it down. You set us up, she hissed. Did I? I asked, genuinely curious about her answer. Or did you set yourselves up 10 years ago when you killed Sarah Anderson? The door splintered open and Detective Rodriguez entered with 3 other officers, weapons drawn. But what happened next wasn't what Janet expected. Rodriguez didn't arrest me or Mrs. Anderson. He walked straight to Janet. Janet Miller, you're under arrest for the murder of Sarah Anderson and the attempted murder of Patricia Miller. Do you think Patricia had been planning this from the beginning? Because here's what I'd learned about myself in the past 24 hours. I was much better at long-term strategy than I'd ever given myself credit for. You see, I said, as Officer Martinez read Janet her rights, when I told you my real name was Patricia Anderson, I wasn't entirely lying. Mrs. Anderson turned to stare at me, her FBI training clearly kicking in as she processed the implications. Sarah Anderson was my twin sister, I continued, watching Janet's face crumble as the truth hit her. Adopted separately when we were babies. She found me 3 years ago through one of those DNA websites. We'd been planning to meet for the first time when she died. The syringe clattered to the floor as Janet's hands went limp. That's impossible, she whispered. Is it? I pulled out my phone and showed them the emails. 3 years of correspondence with Sarah Anderson, planning our reunion, sharing our lives. She told me about her boyfriend Michael, about his controlling mother and violent sister, about how scared she was that something would happen to her if she tried to leave. Michael, who'd been silent since the police arrived, finally found his voice. Patricia, I didn't know about Janet. I swear I didn't know. Detective Rodriguez looked up from his handcuffs. Mr. Miller, your sister confessed to pushing Sarah Anderson down the basement stairs during our investigation last month. She also confessed to bribing Judge Henderson to close the case quickly. Last month? Mrs. Anderson's voice was sharp with confusion. I nodded. I've been working with the FBI for 6 months, Mrs. Anderson, ever since I found Sarah's emails describing her fear of Janet, ever since I realized my sister didn't die in an accident. The truth was flowing now like water through a broken dam. The house purchase, the marriage to Michael, moving here, it was all part of a joint FBI local police operation to get Janet to reveal herself. But the live stream, the panic button, Mrs. Anderson was trying to piece together what had been real and what had been performance. All real, I said, but not my only insurance policy. I turned to Janet, who was staring at me like I was a ghost. Did you really think I'd walk into the same trap that killed my sister without backup? Janet's confession came in broken pieces as Detective Rodriguez led her toward the door. She was going to ruin everything. Michael was finally getting his life together, and she was going to destroy him with her stories about our family. I just meant to scare her, but she fought back, and I pushed her, and then you spent 10 years convincing yourself it was justified. Mrs. Anderson finished, her voice cold as winter. But as Janet reached the doorway, she turned back with that predatory smile I'd seen earlier. "You think you've won something?" she laughed. "Ask your precious husband what he knew about Sarah's bruises. Ask him why she was really scared." The question hung in the air like poison gas as the police car drove away with Janet inside. Michael was sitting on my couch, Sarah's couch, with his head in his hands. "I never hit her," he said without looking up, but I knew Janet was unstable. When Sarah started talking about moving away, about ending things between us, Janet kept saying she'd handle it. I thought she meant she'd convince Sarah to stay. "When did you know Janet had killed her?" Detective Rodriguez asked, his notebook out. "When Patricia started asking questions yesterday, when Mrs. Anderson showed up, I saw the look on Janet's face and I knew." Michael finally looked at me, and his eyes were red with tears. "I should have protected her. I should have protected both of you." Mrs. Anderson had been silent through Michael's confession, but now she spoke. "What happens to him?" she asked Rodriguez. "Accessory after the fact. Obstruction of justice. He'll serve time, but nothing like what Janet's facing." I watched my husband, ex-husband, being led away in handcuffs and felt something I didn't expect: pity. "Michael," I called out as Rodriguez helped him into the back seat, "I'm sorry it ended this way." He nodded but didn't speak. Some apologies are too big for words. Mrs. Anderson and I stood in the doorway of the house that had brought us together, watching the police cars disappear down the tree-lined street. The late afternoon sun was slanting through the windows, highlighting dust motes that danced like tiny spirits. "So what happens now?" she asked. I looked around at the home I'd bought to trap a killer, at the boxes still scattered from Linda's hasty packing, at the broken china from when she dropped everything in shock. Now we decide what justice actually looks like. Have you ever won something that felt like losing? Because standing in that house, I realized that revenge had given me everything I'd wanted and nothing I actually needed. Mrs. Anderson seemed to read my thoughts. "Sarah wouldn't have wanted this to destroy you too," she said quietly. "How can you be so sure?" She pulled out her phone and showed me a video I'd never seen. Sarah laughing and spinning in what I now recognized as this very living room. She sent me this the week before she died. She said she'd found her birth sister and couldn't wait to introduce us. She said her sister was going to help her start over. The woman in the video could have been my reflection, but her joy was something I'd forgotten how to feel. "She was happy," I whispered. "She was hopeful," Mrs. Anderson corrected. "There's a difference." Over the next 3 months, I learned what that difference meant. The house sat empty while Janet's trial proceeded, and Michael served his sentence. Mrs. Anderson and I met for coffee every Tuesday, slowly building the relationship Sarah had dreamed of. "I keep thinking about what you said," Mrs. Anderson told me one particularly cold morning in November, about how winning sometimes means everyone loses. I stirred my coffee thoughtfully. The media attention had died down, but the weight of everything we'd uncovered still pressed on my shoulders like a lead blanket. Janet's in prison. Michael's in prison. Linda's moved to Florida to escape the shame. And I'm living in a hotel room because I can't bear to go back to Chicago or stay in that house. But Sarah has justice. Does she? I asked. Or does she have revenge? Because I'm starting to think those are very different things. Or, Mrs. Anderson reached across the table and took my hand. What would justice look like to you? The question haunted me through Thanksgiving, which I spent alone in my hotel room, and into December when the snow started falling on the house that still legally belonged to me. That's when I remembered Sarah's emails about her dream of opening a support center for women leaving abusive relationships. She'd wanted to buy the house, not just to live in, but to transform it into something that helped other people heal. What if we don't sell the house? I asked Mrs. Anderson during one of our Tuesday meetings. What if we turn it into what Sarah actually wanted? Her eyes lit up for the first time since I'd known her. A women's shelter? More than that, a resource center. Legal aid, counseling, job training. A place where women can rebuild their lives without fear. The Sarah Anderson Foundation, Mrs. Anderson said, and her voice was warm with possibility. That's how I learned the difference between justice and revenge. Revenge takes from your enemy. Justice gives to the people who need it most. The paperwork took months. Converting a residential property to a nonprofit facility meant navigating bureaucracy that would have impressed even my legal training. But Mrs. Anderson had connections from her FBI days, and I had experience with real estate law. Michael wrote to me from prison in March. The letter was brief. Patricia, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know that what you're doing with the house would have made Sarah happy. She used to talk about helping other women the way she wished someone had helped her. I'm sorry for everything. I hope someday you can heal from what my family put you through. Michael. I didn't write back, but I didn't throw the letter away either. Forgiveness, I was learning, wasn't something you decided to do. It was something that happened to you, gradually, like sunrise. The Sarah Anderson Foundation opened on the first anniversary of my confrontation with Janet. Mrs. Anderson cut the ribbon while local news cameras rolled, and I spoke about my sister's vision of turning pain into purpose. Sarah never got to meet the twin sister she'd searched for her whole life, I told the small crowd gathered on the front porch, but her dream of helping other women find safety and rebuild their lives will live on in this house. Do you think this is the ending you expected? Because I learned something important that day. The best endings aren't about victory, they're about transformation. Mrs. Anderson became the foundation's first board chair, and I took a leave of absence from my law practice to serve as executive director. The house, that had been the scene of so much pain, became a place of healing. Our first resident was a woman named Maria, who arrived with her 2 young daughters, and nothing else but the clothes on their backs. Watching her children play in Sarah's garden while she attended job training classes, I finally understood what my sister had meant about hope being different from happiness. 6 months later, Janet was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Michael received 8 years but would be eligible for parole in 4. Linda sent a card from Florida, a simple "I'm sorry" in her careful cursive. I was in Sarah's old bedroom, now converted into an office, when Mrs. Anderson knocked on the door frame. "How are you doing with all this?" she asked. I looked out the window at the garden where Maria's daughters were teaching the newest resident's son how to plant tomatoes. "I think I'm finally learning how to live with it," I said. "The grief." "The love," I corrected. I spent so long focused on avenging Sarah that I forgot to celebrate her. This place, these women, this work. This is how I love her now. Mrs. Anderson smiled, and for the first time since I'd known her, it reached her eyes. "She would be proud of you. Both of you. The sister she never got to meet, and the sister she always hoped you'd become." A year later, the foundation had helped 18 women and their children transition to independent living. We'd expanded to include a legal clinic staffed by volunteer attorneys and a support group that met every Thursday in what used to be Sarah's living room. I was reviewing applications for our new counselor position when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. "Patricia, this is Michael. I'm out on parole." I'd been expecting this call for months, but it still took my breath away. "How are you?" "Different," he said simply. "Prison changes you. Therapy changes you. I wanted to call because I'm starting a support group for family members of people who've committed violent crimes. People like me who have to live with loving someone who did terrible things." "That sounds important," I said, and meant it. I was wondering, would it be okay if I visited the foundation sometime? Not to see you necessarily, but to see what Sarah's dream became, to see what good came from all the bad. I looked out at the garden where our newest resident was teaching her daughter to read under the apple tree Sarah had planted. "Yes," I said, I think that would be okay. True victory, I'd learned, wasn't when your enemy became irrelevant. It was when your enemy became someone who could also choose healing over harm. The last chapter of this story isn't mine to write. It belongs to Maria, who graduated from our job training program and now manages a local restaurant. It belongs to Jennifer, who left her abusive marriage and is now in law school. It belongs to the dozens of women who will walk through Sarah's door in the years to come, carrying their pain and their hope in equal measure. But if I had to write an ending, it would be this. Some houses are built for families. Others are built for healing. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you discover that those two things are the same. Mrs. Anderson and I still meet every Tuesday for coffee, but now we meet in Sarah's kitchen, planning the next expansion of the foundation. We're thinking about adding a children's program, maybe some educational workshops for the community. What story in your life needs to be told? I asked her last Tuesday, echoing the question from my outline. She smiled and pointed to the wall where we'd hung photos of every woman who'd graduated from our program. This one, she said, the story that starts where the other one ended. The story about what happens when you choose to build something instead of tearing something down. And in the garden outside, Sarah's apple tree bloomed for the third spring since her death, heavy with the promise of fruit that would feed the next group of women brave enough to start over. Sometimes the best revenge is living well, but the best justice is helping others live well too.